I join you in welcoming the new year. We enter 2020 with uncertainty and insecurity all around. Persistent inequality and rising hatred, a warring world and a warming planet. Climate change is not only a long-term problem, but a clear and present danger, and we cannot afford to
completely natural
with a generation that fiddled while the planet burned. But there is also hope. This year, my New Year's message is to the greatest source of that hope, the world's young people.
That in itself just shows how low these people are willing to stoop in their attempts to achieve their end goal. Brainwash the young with alarmism, communist rhetoric, propaganda for the most part, completely indoctrinating them. Every single education system across the West, as far as I'm aware, one by one, has been overhauled with an education fit for purpose to teach them all about sustainability, teach them all the rhetoric that they need to know in order for them to plaster it on placards and wander about so the governments can pretend that they wouldn't have acted if it wasn't for the bravery of these students. I just have to wonder just what social justice, human rights and feminism have to do with the so-called climate emergency remains to be seen.
To gender equality, to social justice and human rights, your generation is on the front lines and in the headlines. I'm inspired by your passion and determination. You are rightly the future, and I am with you. The United Nations stands with you and belongs to you. 2020 marks the 75th anniversary of the United Nations. We are launching a decade of action for the Sustainable Development Goals, our blueprint for a fair globalization.
Fair globalization, well. Decade of action to ensure that every country necessary requirements in order for them to take everything over come 2030.
Celebrate the start of 2020 and a new decade. We look forward to a year in which Scotland will be at the centre of international attention. In November, the United Nations Climate Change Summit in Glasgow will attract more than 30,000 people from around the world.
I wonder how they'll be getting there.
Hopefully that summit
Can they not video call?
Will lead to progress in tackling the most important issue that the world faces.
Oh yeah, okay.
And it will give Scotland a chance to show that we are leading by example, not just by reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, but by doing so in a way that helps to build a fairer, healthier and happier society.
A fairer society. And I'm left with more questions than answers. What relevancy does a fairer society have to do with climate change, I wonder?
The Glasgow Summit comes near the end of what will be a historic year. Against the wishes of most people in Scotland, we will leave the European Union at the end of January. No, be a source of deep regret for many of us.
Oh, get in the bin.
In the year ahead, the Scottish Government will do everything we can to mitigate the worst impacts of Brexit. We will provide support and reassurance for the EU citizens who have done whether we wish to become an independent. In autumn, we will deliver a major increase in childcare provision, meaning that all 3 and 4-year-olds and 2-year-olds from poorer families will be able to receive 1,140 hours of free childcare each year. That's a vital part of our plans to make Scotland the best country in the world in which to grow up.
For the third time tonight, I'm left with more questions than answers. Why would you waste any time at all trying to make Scotland the best country in the world for children to grow up, when Scotland currently has record low births? Unless, of course, you are trying to entice people from further afield, with Scotland becoming a fairer, more healthier, outward-looking society if Thin Lips has her way.
It needs young people to keep speaking out, keep thinking big, keep pushing boundaries and keep up the pressure. I wish you...
What's the Scottish Government doing to prevent climate change? Most people think it's not their job or it's too late to prevent global warming, which is a lie. If more politicians back environmental change, then a big difference could happen.
Did your teacher tell you that one?
Great question, Erin, and firstly I agree with you, it's not too late to tackle climate change and we should never think it is, and it's everybody's job. It's my job as First Minister, it's every politician's job everywhere in the world, and it's the job of everybody across the country and every country. Important. But my last point would be governments can set targets and governments should set targets, but if we are to meet these targets, we all have to think about how we live. We all have to think about our own impact on the environment, and I think it is fantastic that young people have really taken the lead here and are forcing adults, people like me, to think much more seriously about how we make a positive change in our everyday lives, and that is vitally important. So keep about how we make a positive change in our everyday lives, and that is vitally important. So keep putting that pressure on, keep putting that pressure on, keep putting that pressure on.
And keep up the pressure. And keep up the pressure.
And that is vitally important. So keep putting that pressure on.
And keep up the pressure. And keep up the pressure.
I fully support the UN global goals. Each and every one of them is really important, but for me, this one, reduced inequalities, is particularly important because giving everybody the best chance in life is so important wherever in the world you live.
Brings up his time at the UN and sort of tries to do this half-assed kind of criticism of the report that he spent 3 years of his life working on.
When I was working for a UN panel on economic sustainability, for the Secretary General, the original narrative was extremely pessimistic. It detailed how we were despoiling the planet and how everything was getting worse and how we were at each other's throats. And
he always criticizes the report for being overly pessimistic about the state of the Earth's environment. And, you know, much of this report is about how climate change and humans affecting the environment are just devastating the planet so much that the United Nations now needs to step in and begin managing how different countries are interacting with the environment and with each other. What's really telling, though, is what Peterson doesn't talk about when he brings up his time working at the United Nations, what he doesn't mention about the paper he worked on. To my knowledge, he has never addressed some of the really scary things that are in this paper, such as the fact that it's literally a Marxist, communist, one-world government blueprint that talks about how the United Nations now needs to step in to create equity inside of nations, between all people, so equality of outcome, and equity between nations. So, for example, between first world nations and third world nations. So this is Marxist wealth transfer, socialist redistribution stuff on a global scale. Yet Jordan Peterson has never criticized this work that he has done in that regard. He just talks about how, oh, you know, they're a little too pessimistic about the environment. Peterson claims that he rewrote this entire document to, quote, strip it of the underlying ideological claptrap. And think about it, what does that actually mean? I mean, the paper still says what it says, but if he's removing the ideological claptrap, as he says, it sounds like they paid him to mask the language in the document so it was less overtly Marxist. One of the things this document mentions a few times is creating equity between different countries. It says here on page 13, equity needs to be at the forefront. Developing countries need time, as well as financial and technological support to transition to sustainable development. And then it says, we must empower all of society, especially women, young people, the unemployed, the most vulnerable, the weakest sections of society. I mean, this is pure Marxism. This is all about, you know, lifting up the oppressed classes and creating social equity for them. Since it's the UN, I mean, it even says like they're focused on accomplishing this in every single country on Earth. And then here on page 25, some more stuff about equity. In spite of some improvements in social equity, vulnerable groups and minorities, etc., indigenous people, disability, undocumented immigrants, so illegal immigrants, and people discriminated against on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. And next, it just straight up says, the principle of equity remains fundamental to sustainable development. And I mean, equity is equality of outcome. This is pure Marxist communism. It starts talking about social equity and carbon prices. It says, so on page 51, it says, social equity is a key element of the scheme which provides support to low-income households to assist with the impact of the carbon price. So here they're actually using climate change as justification for socialist redistribution of wealth. Where things start getting really scary, on page 68, it says equity both between and within countries is central to sustainable development. What does it mean to create equality of outcome between countries? Well, what this is saying is they want to transfer wealth between countries, from the wealthier countries, aka the Western world, into the third world. And they believe that this is going to have a positive impact on climate change. That's their justification for doing this. That's for a process to explore the concept and application of the critical issue of equity in relation to sustainable development. But this document that Jordan Peterson rewrote to strip it of the ideological claptrap is a Marxist one world government communist white paper